Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today for our Parenting in the Time of Corona um, webinar. And we're just really excited to get started. I'm so glad all you could hop in. And if we'll be sending the replay afterward, if you're not able to stay the whole time and you want to still get all the great information, we'll make sure that you have access. Yeah. So, Miss Guidry, Kelly, this is Kelly Guidry. She is our clinical director at Connection Child and Family Center. Fantastic therapist, all around awesome person. And in case you don't know me, I'm Dr. Lauren Pasqua. I'm a psychologist. I own the practice Connection Child and Family Center in the Woodlands, Texas, and we focus on primarily on children and families and couples, and our goal is really to help everyone in the family be connected, have great communication, and feel very loved and related to each other. And we know that's all extremely difficult right now during this time, this very stressful time of forced quarantine. So we thought we would give some of our ideas and advice, as well as take questions at the end. There'll be a Q&A for other people to jump in and share, ask questions, and we'll do our best to personalize that to some degree. But we both are moms, and so we're in this with you. It's true, we're all in it together, and we are all struggling through figuring out, how do we do this thing? How do we parent? How do we work? How do we, manage all the things while we're all home together 24/7? So let's do it. Let's figure out some things we could work on and how we can make this be a more peaceful time for everyone in the family.
Sounds great. And I just want to add too that there's a chat feature, also a Q&A button. So if there's questions that come up along the way, drop them into that so that we don't forget them. So just go ahead and put them in there. And then when we get to that Q&A portion, we can make sure that we address all those.
Awesome. Thanks so much for mentioning that.
Yeah.
So here's our agenda. Do you want to share with us what we're going to be covering, or do you want me to do that?
Yeah, so we're hoping we can kind of look at this from a big picture perspective. What's happening right now, and how can we understand it? Because it's something that we've never really faced before, and quite frankly, it's bringing out a lot of emotions. Some positive, some negative, some positive and negative all together, and just kind of trying to nail that down. We want to go through what some of those emotions are. What do we do with them, and why are they happening? And then we're going to talk about some anchors, which we're going to explain kind of what those are, but ways to feel grounded back as a mom or a dad or as a family, whatever that might look like for everybody in the household. And that's kind of where our tips and tricks will come into play as well.
Awesome.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh, yes. Meltdown Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, all the days. Multiple times a day over here. I don't know about you, Kelly.
Yes, meltdown Monday, meltdown Wednesday, whatever that might look like. So yeah.
And me too. I think I've had a few meltdowns over here. Anybody else? Raise your hand.
Sometimes it's several times a day. On my own, I mean, not my kids. But yeah, just a little humor, because this is a time where I think a lot of people could really use some good humor. So there's a lot of these memes going around, but try to find that humor because it's really important. You got to find ways to lighten your mood as you're trying to balance everything that's happening. So
yeah.
Okay. Okay, so this is just emotions put onto a page. And so I'm just wondering if you guys can drop into that chat box, maybe some emotions that you feel like you've experienced throughout this time, kind of different ones that have come up that maybe you were surprised that they've come up, especially as the longer we're in quarantine. I know I'm finding different ones come up, and I'm experiencing, a lot of different stuff on a daily basis. So anybody would like to share any emotions that they've had come up?
Well, I can share verbally. Let's see. Gosh, I don't know. All of them? Certainly there's been some negative ones, which we always tend to focus on the most, I would say. We have someone saying frustration. Oh, yeah, that's a big one. Pretty much on a daily basis, multiple times frustration. Weary, I love that one. That's a great word. I said a level of exhaustion I don't think I've experienced much. It's not just physical exhaustion, it's mental exhaustion, it's really soul exhaustion of just the worry and concern about the world and what's going to happen in the future, that apprehensive feeling, emotional exhaustion, stress. Yep. Check, check. Anybody having any positive feelings that come up? I mean, I know it's easy to focus on the negative, and I think there's probably some aspects that we might feel even a little guilty for having any positive emotions during such a challenging experience for so many. But I know I've had moments where I've actually felt grateful for the time that I'm, being given to spend with my kids that I normally don't have. That's slowing down and really connecting.
Yeah, and somebody just said family connection. I love
Yeah.
seeing that because I think this is a time, despite that we're feeling some stress and frustration, but we've also been able to kind of, I know at my house, slow down a little bit and get more of that quality time in as well. So
Yeah, for sure.
yeah, we just wanted to kind of normalize this, that this is very, I think everybody's having some of those negative emotions happen, and just make you feel like, you're not alone in that, because knowing that other people might be feeling that same way could be just really helpful. So
Yeah. I mean, anxiety, I think, is a big one for all of us, which we'll go into for more now. But that's a huge one for me. Um, about all different kinds of topics, not just being a parent. So let's find out why we are all feeling so anxious, overwhelmed, anxious, depressed. Yep. All of those big ones. So we are looking at this big picture in the mental health community. We're all recognizing that this is not just an ordinary event, which I think we all know. Collectively, as a world, at an international level, we're all together experiencing a traumatic event, where we are feeling that our life might be in danger, to that life-threatening component of trauma. Um, there's, emotional harm, which we'll go into for sure, but we've lost a lot of things. We lost our regular social interactions. We've lost our space, potentially, financial security, time, the self-care time, the time away from our kids, from our families, where we're really filling our own tanks and rejuvenating, whatever that might look like for you. Our routines that give us structure and security, just the ease of movement in life. I've been hearing a lot about that, the grief and trauma around that, and feeling like so locked in, that loss of freedom. And then in general, the loss of who we are, our identity, our purpose, our productivity, just really a lot of very traumatic emotional experiences also tied in with this very real threat of potential illness or even loss of life for ourselves or our loved ones. And trauma can be either one. It doesn't necessarily have to be reflective of your own experience. It can be, something that someone you care for deeply or love is experiencing.
yeah, and I just want to add to that too. I think that definition of trauma is so important because trauma happens, two people can experience the same event, but they respond to it very differently. So nobody's going to experience this event the same way. So you're not going to have the same response as your significant other, your neighbor, your friends, your family. And so it's okay. It's an individualized experience. And I think that's important to know. How you're handling it is because that's how you're responding to this. And that could look very different than the person next to you.
I think that's a really great point. And actually, it brings to mind something that I've been seeing people talking about, and I think it might be important to reference in that, especially for folks who maybe had a previous trauma history, even if it's something that, you've worked hard at overcoming and working through, new traumatic events can bring up old feelings and of fear, anxiety, threat, or in contrast, for folks that have had more of a long-term or severe trauma history, it can actually numb their emotional response. We call that sort of like dissociation and being separate from that numbing feeling. And I have heard some folks talking about, it's weird, everybody else is so upset, but I really don't feel anything. I just feel numb. And I want to normalize that too, that there's nothing wrong with you if you're having that experience right now, or that you're kind of in a state of shock still of, is this really real? Is this my reality? And that kind of goes into also the fact that this is a grief situation. We are all grieving collectively at the same time. Again, all these things that we've lost, as well as a likely loss of our expected future, what our hopes and dreams, what we imagined our future to look like, where that is going to be changed probably forever. And some of it will be a good change, and some, might be harder to deal with.
Perfect. Yeah, I'm going to switch here and just kind of talk about, because I think that the trauma response too that we're talking about is not this, it's an interesting kind of trauma, because it's not an impact like, boom, this happened to our family, which it is, but it's long-term too at the same time. So you have kind of an immediate impact as well as a long-term trauma that's going on, because we don't know when this is going to end. So I want to make sure that this is kind of unique in that we're still figuring it all out.
Right. And it's more of a chronic stress, right, Kelly? Like
right.
Something that's persisting, and we have not gotten through it yet, and we don't actually know when we will. So we're really in that state of uncertainty, ambiguity still.
Yes. Yeah. So this is, I'm going to kind of geek out a little bit here. I love being able to talk about the brain and what's happening in the brain because of the chronic stress. And so this is a stress response that you could be experiencing if you're having some of those kind of negative emotions build up. And it's helpful to know what's happening in your brain, because then you can figure out ways to counter that. So this is a very simplistic kind of idea of the brain, but there's three main areas that you're talking about. And so the first one is what we would call the lizard brain. And that's this brain right there where the arrow is pointing to. And that's going to be it's kind of the oldest part of the brain that first started developing. It's the messenger. There's a really direct route from what your body hears and takes in straight to this lizard brain. So if it feels alarmed or endangered, it's kind of on a higher level already. The next one is going to be your mammalian brain, which is your limbic system. It's going to help manage those emotions. It's going to help you kind of figure some of that out. It's a kind of the second kind of older part of the brain. It's the second to develop when kids are developing. And then the last one is your human brain. And this is the most developed in humans. It's kind of what gives us conscious thought. It's the neocortex. When you see pictures of the brain, it's like the waffle part of the brain, it looks like kind of like a waffle.
I like that.
Yeah. And so this part of the brain is what gives us problem solving and logic. Some people will use the synonym of a thinker, but it's what gives us that ability to kind of calm ourselves down and say, I'm going to be okay. So when we're talking about kind of those long-term stress responses or this chronic stress response, this part of the brain, because there's such a quick route to the lizard brain, sometimes this part of the brain doesn't get tapped into. So it's actually inhibited, which means we've got to find a way for it to get tapped back into.
Right.
Did you want to add anything to that, Dr. Pasqua?
I would just say that the mammalian brain that's involved in emotion with the limbic system is also involved in memory. And again, that's where that trauma, all those traumatic feelings get kind of connected with an event or a trigger, and maybe triggered or anyway, it's involved in memory. And so that component is also going to be playing a role, again, if you've had a trauma history or you've had other stress responses in the past, that component is going to be involved. And then the human brain also, I think, is really important to note that it's very important in being able to inhibit our natural responses. So our impulse control center in the brain, for both inhibiting emotional responses as well as behavioral responses. And if that part is offline, sort of as we kind of think about it, then it's going to be a lot harder for both adults and kids to do that when they're under stress.
Right, right. Which kind of leads us into our next kind of topic. So you guys are feeling some of these big emotions already, but this is also a stress response for our kids. So kids are going to experience that differently, because a lot of times they're still figuring out self-regulation. They're still trying to understand, what do I do when I feel anxious? What do I do when I feel depressed? So a lot of times as adults, we find ways to help cope and manage that, and we figure out what works for us. Kids don't always have that, and so their tolerance for stress gets even shorter, which means you're going to see potentially more outbursts, maybe some regression. In you know, if you have little ones, maybe it's regression in potty training or in reading or writing or other areas that they may be experiencing that. Even with older ones, less motivation to do stuff, you know, just that kind of like, what does it even matter anymore? I think I got told that this week by a kid with, why am I doing this homework? It's just review work. There's no point in it, you know? So
just that overwhelm. I'm just really seeing a lot of teens sort of just paralyzed almost. They just don't know what to do or how to do anything, because they're just in such a state of stress.
Yeah, and I think that is an important thing to remember when you're with your kids, because we're with our families a lot right now. And so when you're with them, you know, if your fuse is shorter, their fuse is shorter too. And so just kind of having that empathy and understanding everybody's coming from a stress response phase right now, because nobody knows what to do with this.
Yeah, and I think it's important to know that a lot of times kids are not aware that they're stressed. They don't recognize what their emotions are or why they're struggling. So they show us with their behavior or their words for older kids, right? But we can tell, like you're saying, we notice regression and behaviors that maybe were older behaviors. Maybe they're clingier, more emotional, more irritable or angry. Maybe there are sleep difficulties. I've been hearing that a lot from all ages, adults and kids. You know, just generally it's impacting every area of life, makes it harder to think and to be able to focus and to be creative. So these are things to be on the lookout for with your kids and within yourself as well.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so this is kind of one of my favorite metaphors for what happens in that brain with the stress response. So if this was your brain sitting inside of your head, and it gets signals down here through your brain stem that then goes into this amygdala, which is kind of that lizard brain area. This front part is that human brain, that prefrontal cortex that gives you that problem solving. So this stress response sends signals, and what it does is it makes that prefrontal cortex, go pop, and makes it go flip, and flips wide open. And when it's flipped wide open, it's really hard to make decisions. Sometimes you even might have decision fatigue. I face that at home, and I'm going, I'm at home. Why am I struggling to make decisions? Like I have, you know, but it's true. So it makes it harder to do some of the stuff that was once very seamless and easy. And so I think that piece is very important to remember. So what we want to do, and I teach this to kids that I work with, when you flip your lid, so that they start to have language of knowing, and that's an easy way that they can do it. We got to find ways that they can then take it and close their lid back, so that way they can feel like, okay, I can still be stressed, but I don't have to be so stressed that I can't manage it. And so we want to make that stress manageable. We want to keep it. The problem is with chronic stress is we went from a level of stress here maybe every day to now we're already elevated. And so since we're already elevated, we're going to have to work that much harder to make sure that we don't flip our lid.
Right. Our capacity for tolerating stress is much smaller than it was before.
Yeah. So yeah. I think that's a good point. That capacity piece is really important.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Oh, anchors.
Anchors. What are anchors? We're excited about this. So, what are the things that ground us and help us feel like stable and safe and calm? Those are the anchors, right? That we have in our life. And those could be things that provide us structure, predictability, things that that feel familiar, that are comfortable, that bring us comfort. And those are the things that help us reduce the stress response and to just get us through these challenging times.
Yeah, and I think that it's important to recognize too that when we're living life as if it was, typical, which is not right now, we kind of have them all kind of juggling in the air, these anchors, and we can kind of pull on them when we need them, right? And so now we might have to redefine what this looks like, which is what we're hopefully is going to help give you some of those tips and tricks to make life more manageable and less stressful at this point.
Right, because we've lost a lot of our anchors, or they're not available to us, the things that generally bring us, peace and grounding. So now what do we do? And that's the question.
Yeah. And that is the question. So there's 5 typical areas where anchors exist. That's what I was kind of saying with the plates kind of rolling around in the air. So they tend to fall in relational, physical, your thinking and cognitions, work and school, and then some and spiritual. So those are kind of the areas we look to find our anchors. I think all of these, if you're just kind of thinking through them, have been impacted to some capacity. And so I'm wondering, do you all have ones that you feel like have been impacted more, or do you feel like they're about the same? If anybody wants to share.
Well, I know one of the things I've initially right off was grieving quite a lot was my regular workout routine that really grounds me, and it brings me a lot of anxiety relief and positive mood, and having that taken away or not able to do that was really hard. And it's something that's been challenging to find a supplement for, because I have 3 small kids, and so they're not really big on me doing workout videos with them.
Yeah, and I think kind of in that would fall into that physical one. And I think in addition to that, I'm also hearing from a lot of people. So not only have I lost my workout routine, but I'm bored. And so I'm going to the refrigerator more. I'm going to the pantry more. I'm pulling out junk food more because I feel like I have nothing else to do. So I think that's also something to think about. Those kind of go hand in hand. I know for myself, sometimes my thoughts, right? So that lives very much internal within us. And having thoughts like just anxious thoughts. When do I get to hug somebody that doesn't live inside of my house again? When do I get to, and just kind of having those what if moments, and it kind of escalates and runs. And so I think for me, that's been something I've had to really challenge and try to keep in check.
It's a really good point. Yes, our thoughts are very powerful indeed.
Yeah. So one of the things that is going to be important is in looking at each of these, finding ways to feel like you have a sense of control again. So relational, what relationships and people do you have in your life right now? And then how are you nurturing those relationships? So for instance, I don't know if anybody else has had this experience, but I've met neighbors, obviously from a distance, but neighbors that I've never met before. And I'm starting to nurture these new relationships. And so, we have different things that we do kind of on a regular basis now. So there's a family down the street, and once a day we sit and with social distancing and play, but we kind of talk about our projects at home and different things like that. I didn't really know them before this. I knew that they lived there, but before this I didn't. So it's something that we now schedule, and we put it on our calendar, and we do it pretty much every day, but it's scheduled, and we look forward to it. It's kind of this exciting thing. So we're really excited when we can actually do something together and not have to stand 6 feet apart.
Someone says that they feel like they're turning into a workaholic because it's the one thing they have control over right now. Yeah, that feeling of control is so important. And when we're out of control in every area of our life, it makes sense that you would reach for the thing that gives you that security and that feeling of control, because this is a very out of control situation.
Yeah, and that struggle of when do I figure out how to put that down? And and still look at my other grounding, my other anchors in my life. I got to be able to set that boundary.
Right, having that limit and boundary, which may be blurred now that we're at home and we're working from home, and so there's really no defined boundary of I leave work and I go home.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Have you done anything to try to combat that for yourself, Dr. Pasquale?
The not having a boundary between work and home.
Mm-hmm.
I try to take a few minutes, in between a work activity. For example, if I'm seeing a client and then I have to go out and be with my family, to just kind of gather my thoughts and just maybe breathe for a few minutes and take a couple of minutes for myself. But it is hard. It is really hard when my kids are right outside the door, maybe even trying to come in the door.
Yeah.
So I get that feeling. It's really a challenge right now. How about you, Kelly?
Yeah, I think one thing that's been somewhat helpful is meetings that I know can get interrupted. I kind of set that like, okay, only if it's an emergency, but otherwise I have like an office hour type thing where I go into my office. I'm still getting dressed like I'm going to work, kind of trying to keep some of that consistency put into play, so that way I try to have and set that boundary. But at the same time, stopping for lunch and stopping at a certain time, because I think, if you're struggling with, I'm going to turn into this workaholic, you can just spend, I know I could spend all day in front of my computer trying to work on things and trying to figure stuff out. So,
Yeah. And
trying
having
to
that
set
separate space, I think, is really helpful too.
Yeah.
I guess I assumed that when I made that comment of I can take that time, but maybe it may not be as common for everyone. But if you can find a way to have a separate working space, whether that be even a corner in your closet, I think that helps to delineate the difference between work and home.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So the next one is going to be kind of, I'm going to jump to it, but then I'm going to come back to this slide just because I want to be able to talk through what this looks like and the importance of it. So I talked about my example of my neighbors and how every day we're trying to schedule that time in. But the scheduling piece is important. And I'm not really one for like down to the hour schedules. I don't know how anybody else feels, but for me, I don't always do that. Like the whole, I got to do this from 8 to 9 and 9 to 10, like it kind of stresses me out even more. But putting it on the calendar, like, today I have a Zoom call with my sister-in-law. I'm excited about it. It's on my calendar. I haven't seen or talked to her in 2 months. And so it's something that I got to put on my schedule earlier this week, and I get to look forward to it later on today. So that's the piece that you want to be able to do with you and your family, is you want to be able to put these anchors on a calendar so that you have those things to kind of look forward to, and it helps you pull them back down and gives you that sense of grounding back into your world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think at this point we have no clear schedule or routine the way that our life usually is. And so in order to get that feeling of security, predictability, making a schedule is really going to be helpful. I know there's been tons of stuff going around on social media about schedules and routines for kids and for families, and it probably is getting old to hear. But there's a reason, a psychological reason, that this is something that is being suggested, because it does bring that feeling of comfort and security to our world and to our kids' worlds. In particular, they are used to a very high level of structure and routine and knowing what's going to come next. And when things that's pulled right out from under them, that really brings up a lot of anxiety. I know the very first day that we were home, my own son, my 6-year-old, I said I was going to make us a schedule for our day. He can be a little bit intense, but that day in particular, he was so rigid about the schedule that I've laid out. He was, it was obviously extremely important to him. He was like, "Mommy, it says 9 o'clock. We eat a snack. We need to have a snack right now." And I realized that was coming from a place of insecurity and anxiety. And that's why he was having such a strong reaction to following that schedule.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a great example. So think about, I'm going to switch back here really quick, but think about in these 5 areas, maybe things that you could do to put some things that you and your family can look forward to. And by you and your family, I mean you and your family. So I think that that piece is really important too. I think that that sense of identity, the blurring of boundaries, I'm working all the time, or I'm afraid I'm going to become this workaholic, and then how do I still balance that with my family life? You've got to figure out, okay, what, you know, how am I addressing these, and then how can I help my family address these as well?
Right. So that everybody's getting their needs met and their obligations met.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So let's get to some tools for home that might be just kind of helpful and walk through. So I'm going to talk about the picture in the middle first with the X's and the O's. This was actually, we have a practicum student that works in our office, and she shared this with me, and I think it is one of the most creative things. So her teenage son has a really dear friend who called. I guess he was bored, and he called and he said, "Hey, I've created this game. I need you guys to get tape, and I need you to get beans." So if you can see by the person in the middle, those are the bean bags on the floor. And so he told them how to draw everything out. And once a week, they now have a Zoom game night with their dear friends. Yeah, and so it's a cool way to get teenagers maybe engaged and get them to be a little creative and just kind of have fun during this time too. That also helps promote that social connection that a lot of these teenagers that we're working with are really, really missing right now. They're social beings, and we are not built for this whole social isolation piece. And so they're really struggling with some of that. I thought that was a super creative thing to be able to do and to use. It gives your kids something to do and occupy their time for a little bit as well, because they can get as creative as they want with it. So did you want to jump with some of these other ones?
Sure. So we have down here at the bottom a statement that we find can be really helpful between partners. If you do have a partner at home, or even another caregiver or family member that you can lean on and work together to share the load, this statement can be really great. While I'm doing dishes, will you please get the kids ready for their bath? So that everybody gets their needs met and communicates effectively in a caring way. And most of the time, partners report that they feel more like a team when they use this kind of terminology together. And we know that right now, in close quarters, parenting around the clock and vying for whose work is more important and who gets the time to do their work, it feels really overwhelming and really stressful, and it's putting quite a toll on partners. And so this is just one tip that we have for trying to reduce that stress.
Yeah, and then the sand timer on the left there of the screen. So that this concept of visual timers, there are, if you type into your app store visual timer, there are a ton of resources out there for a visual timer. Sometimes with little ones, we tell them, I need 10 minutes. 10 minutes in the concept of a little one's mind is really vague. They don't have that grasp yet of what 10 minutes is. And so, being able to have visual timers and set expectations around those can be really helpful. So if you're looking for 15 minutes of alone time, you set your timer for 15 minutes so they can see it, and then you can go and do what you need to attend to. And that can be somewhat helpful. That way they know it's not forever. They can come bug you when that time's up, or they can come find you when that time's up. And that can be a really helpful tool.
Yeah, it's also really great for doing transitions between activities. So if you're homeschooling or you're having to switch between one activity to another, we often recommend the use of a visual timer. This especially is really good when the kids are involved in something they are enjoying a lot and they're going to have to move to something that maybe won't be as pleasurable, and setting that timer to show them how much time is left on that activity, or how much time they need to work on their schoolwork before being allowed to, say, get on the computer or chat with a friend or something like that. So timers are huge, and they are helpful in many ways.
Yeah. I just had a thought about the communication piece with partners. I also think this is affording us a really good opportunity to model that to our kids as well. So I would encourage that too, that letting your kids know that you need to attend to something. And so being able to model that for them gives them the, they're recognizing, okay, mom takes breaks, dad takes breaks, I need to take breaks too. And so you're being able to model the expression of your needs, but also do that in a really healthy way that allows them to recognize that it's okay to need that. So just wanted to, before I forgot that, just throw that out there. The last picture we have on here, this is another one of our therapists. It's her daughter. They did emoji sugar cookie baking.
She likes to bake.
Yes. And she was able to promote that discussion of emotions and what that looks like. And I think she actually had cookie cutters, which I need to ask her where she got those, because that's pretty cool.
They are really cool.
Yeah, but you can even make your own. So if you're, have your kids kind of do some verbal expression through baking, they can kind of decorate their own cookies and just kind of use that as a tool to create a dialogue around maybe what they're feeling or going through right now.
I love that.
I do too. Okay. Ooh, this is a good topic.
Oh, this is a big one. This is one I've been hearing a lot from moms and dads too, and not just moms, but I just happen to talk to moms a lot more. I don't know. But I've been hearing a lot about there's no me time. I have no time alone. I have no time for self-care. I don't know how to, manage my stress when I'm with my family 24/7. And I know that I can relate to that. It's been really hard. It's been something that it's taking a toll, and surely finding some ways to manage that is really, really important so that we can keep having our tank full to give to our kids during this stressful time. So we need to figure out how can we set some healthy boundaries and also be flexible. Flexibility is, really important in a time where things are constantly changing. We don't have a set structure. And so we have to figure out, how can we be flexible and maybe do things a little differently than we normally would in order to get that time met. So 2 things I think you could do right now, if you're not already doing it, I highly recommend it, even not in the time of COVID. Like, you should have a scheduled quiet time period in your home every day that your family is home together. Whether you have a 6-year-old or a 16-year-old, we all need downtime. We all need quiet time. And it's something I think that you can start young and start making this a habit so that it carries you through all your kids' years in their home. So that could be like after lunch, whatever time frame works for you. And it doesn't necessarily mean that they have to take a nap. It just means that everybody needs to be in their own personal space doing some kind of quiet activity. And again, this is a great time to use a timer for younger kids in particular, or a clock, to let them know how long they need to stay. Ideally working up to probably about an hour. And well, before you say, oh, my kid can never be by themselves for an hour, try it. You might be surprised. You might really be surprised. This is the time when I see the most creativity and play come out of my kids. They refuse to leave us alone any other time, but they know they're supposed to be in their room. And I can hear them sometimes on the monitor. It's amazing the stuff that they come up with during this like forced quiet time.
And I love what you said there too about working up to it. So if you try it and you don't make it for an hour, that's okay, right? So start with it and then make it the goal. So maybe you get 15 minutes, but you're still going to set that expectation that it's going to be an hour. And so you want to just kind of work your way up to that if it doesn't happen that first time they do make it the whole hour.
Right. And it could be that you just need to check in every 10 or 15 minutes. They need to see your face and know you haven't, abandon them or something, and they want to show you what they're working on, and then you can leave again. This could be a time for older kids that you allow them to have some screen time. If you have the kind of kid that really just has a hard time playing independently, or they've already had a lot of free play time, this might be the time that you pull out that tablet or you let them play the video game. Flexibility, again, screen time right now, the usual limits on screen time do not apply in the middle of a crisis. We all need to do what we need to do to make it through this. And I know I'm using my screen time report says I'm way up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I find myself and then I have to tell myself, put it down.
Right. Go do something else. Go outside. Talk to
Yeah.
the kid. Yes, absolutely. But I just want to also make sure that we give you that permission. Like, if you are feeling really upset or having a really hard day, it's okay. Your kids will survive, and they will, do something else later in the day. Use the screen time if you need to.
Yeah. And then another one that you could do today. So we talked about
Right.
scheduling that
Quiet time.
1 hour quiet time, but also finding 15 minutes to just kind of do something for yourself. And so that can be if you have a partner at home, that can be an agreement with them, like they're going to take everything for that 15 minutes, and
put it on the schedule.
Put it on the schedule. That's right. So schedule that. Give yourself something to look forward to. And whether that's a walk outside, whether that's a podcast you want to listen to, whether it's you jumping in your car and just going for a drive so that you can get out of the house. I know I left one day my house and I went, I haven't left my house in 7 days. 7 days. It was like, I felt like I was scratching off the crust and seeing the world for the first time. So I think that piece is really important, that we still have that time to ourselves, and you make sure that you find a way to do that.
Right. And it might not be your usual, hour-long workout or getting the nails done or whatever it is that usually brings you that kind of relaxation. But 15 minutes, it's surprising how much better and how recharged you can be with just even a small dose of self-care time.
Yeah. Okay. Anything else for the self-care or the me time hacks that we didn't hit on?
I think that's mostly what we wanted to talk about today. I mean, self-care in general, of course, really making sure that you're moving your body and getting that physical activity in. Physical activity is huge for improving sleep, improving mood, reducing anxiety. I mean, the benefits are immense. And so really trying to build that into every day. I've never seen so many people outside in my neighborhood in the entire time I've lived here. It's amazing. Every time I go outside with my kids, all hours of the day, there's people walking and biking and running. It's incredible. And I really hope this is something that persists after this event. It's just been really awesome to see.
Yeah. And on those rainy days, I use inside, we'll do it together, like a little dance party with Go Noodle.
Oh, that's a good one.
Yeah, it's a free resource. It's an app, and we have Apple TVs, but I think any smart TV, you can download it. I don't know that to be a fact, but it was free. So I could also put it on the TV. And so we can dance and we can kind of get our physical movement in if it's raining or if it's too hot or whatever the case is as well.
You can get it on YouTube. We watch them on YouTube. And you can also, we also really like Cosmic Kids Yoga. And then for older ones, I like Yoga with Adriene a lot, which is free right now. And then a lot of other, I know a lot of different gyms and things are offering free classes online right now. So, check out what's available and see if there's something that kind of sparks your interest, or you've always wanted to try Zumba and maybe somebody's offering Zumba online right now for free. This is a perfect time to try it.
Perfect.
I love this image.
I do too.
So we're going to talk about emotions, right?
Yeah, and I think the biggest takeaway when we picked this picture was, don't forget to give yourself grace. I've talked to so many parents who are saying, well, I'm certainly not doing this perfectly. Nobody is.
Is there such a thing?
Yeah, is there such a thing? So know that it's okay. Whatever's happening, it's happening because we don't know what to expect. And so give yourself grace. We're all, none of us are perfect. And so just know that it's okay to not be perfect.
And there is no such thing, even under less stressful conditions, as a perfect parent. I think one of the biggest things that we try to work with parents on understanding and putting into their repertoire is that if you have a conflict, if you yell, if you raise your voice or give a punishment or whatever it might be that you later regret, that's okay. It's a perfect opportunity for you to model several things. Apologizing taking ownership and responsibility for your mistakes. And so those are great opportunities, really learning opportunities for your kids, and for you to reconnect and repair that relationship. So
Yeah, I
give
think
yourself
it,
grace.
give yourself grace, and it also models that they don't have to be perfect. We work with lots of anxious kids who have those very perfectionistic tendencies, and so they
Yeah.
struggle with that, feeling like they're not meeting their own internal expectations. So this is a great time to also model that for them as well.
Right. And then I think, kind of going back to your original comment about emotions, and recognizing all the emotions that we are all feeling right now, and kind of trying to be mindful of that, and considering that, from a compassionate way. If you're seeing something happening inside of your kids, you're seeing them behave a certain way, instead of jumping immediately to the conclusion that they're being manipulative, or they're just trying to be difficult, or they should be able to do this, why can't they just do this assignment. I think it's good to take a step back and kind of get curious about why, what's happening, where's this coming from. Are they feeling something? And if they are, can you label it? Can you narrate that? Can you tell them, I see that you're disappointed that you can't see your friends. I see that you're stressed, that you don't know how to learn over the internet. um, and so just really taking that compassionate stance and that curious lens, with your kids and with yourself. If you find that you're, feeling really stressed or irritable, or, suddenly crying, wondering why.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that. Okay. So this is, we have a bunch of different groups that we have online. This is just kind of resources for you if you feel like maybe you need something more that we can help. So we're doing 30-minute parent consults for just specific challenges. And then we have a bunch of groups that we're starting. Some are support groups, some are more process groups. But we're finding that groups are being really helpful during this time of uncertainty, because it's allowing people to recognize they're not alone in this. And right now we're pretty isolated. So it's kind of that ability to reach out and just know other people are going through this today, the same things. So.
And we have a special offer for people who register for this webinar. The first 25 individual families that reach out to us afterward to take advantage of the offer, we are offering for us up to 4 sessions at a significantly reduced rate, of $100 a session, which is about 65% off the rate for most of our therapists. And we're going to do this just during this time, again, for families that reach out to us after attending this webinar. And we really hope that this will be of value to you. This is really a great opportunity in some ways that we don't always have, to take advantage of downtime, to really go internal and reflect about what we are struggling with, or what we could improve upon, what we could improve upon as parents, how you could improve your family dynamics or your parenting skills and really level up to overcome those challenging areas, as well as supporting, those that are struggling with stress, anxiety, depression, etc. I think this is an opportunity, though, that you could really capitalize on. So please try to reach out to us if this is of interest to you.
Yeah. And I think now we're going to head into our Q&A section. So I'm going to see how I can open up the Q&A box. But if you have questions, drop them in that Q&A box, or drop them in the chat box, so that we can kind of address more individualized questions that you might have, or things that you're struggling with that maybe we didn't hit on. So we're happy to just kind of answer any of those as they come up. I think as we're waiting, I want to say too, with the whole schedule, sometimes your kids may struggle with things like ADHD or anxiety. So something that's been helpful, my daughter's pretty kind of all over the place. And so I have to give her little tasks. So I can't put a bunch of tasks in front of her, or otherwise she feels very overwhelmed. So we do one task at a time. So that's just food for thought there. it looks like we have a question in the Q&A box. I can't open that for some reason,
I
Lauren.
could see it. That's okay. It
Okay.
says, my son is being really mean to his little brother, a lot more than usual. I think it's partly because of being cooped up at home all day. Do you have any advice on how to get him to calm down? Oh, that's a good question. Well, I guess I would want to, of course, have a little more information, as I always would, on what is the schedule like now. But a great way to work on calming in particular, if that's exactly what your goal is to build in not only physical activity, which I think is really important for kids to get their energy out. So we're taking bike rides every day. We're going on nature walks every day. We're getting out in the backyard every day. If that's possible for you, I highly recommend trying to build that in. But also, this is a great time to start working on some mindfulness and relaxation skills. And we are actually doing a Mindful Moments for Families series on our Instagram account where we're offering different strategies for kids to practice being like still like a frog and taking deep breaths, or doing some yoga poses or some other kind of fun activities that we have planned. So I kind of recommend trying some of those things out if you haven't done that before.
Yeah, and I think I would add to that too. Sometimes when siblings get really, like this, I like to give them tasks on things to work together. So try to get them to do something together, like build a tent. And they have to take turns taking the lead. So they get to, make decisions for 10 minutes and then the next one for 10 minutes, but trying to get them to work together to recognize that they can. And then expanding on that, like, man, you guys did a really nice job working together. I think that you guys problem solved that really well, because they need to hear that also, that they can. So that would be something else that I would just encourage.
And I would say probably if there's a lot more teasing or bullying or controlling behaviors than normal, think about that in terms of what we discussed, that big picture, high level stress response. Is this happening because your child doesn't have control in his life? He feels very out of control. And, I can try to control my brother, and that helps me feel more secure. So where else can you offer control, choices, power in this difficult times to give him that feeling, or, of just having some control over a very uncontrollable situation?
Wow, what a great point.
Anybody else have any questions? Please drop them in here. Use us. We are happy to help. Well, I know that I've had some folks commenting about some of the struggles that they're having, so I could just mention some of those if that would be helpful for other people to hear. One family member that I talked with mentioned they were having a really difficult time with their partner figuring out how to both get their needs met in that work environment, and being able to do their work and seeing that their work was valued by the other partner. Did you have any thoughts about that, Kelly?
Yeah, I think that's so I would say the first thing is you have to have a solid way to communicate that to your partner, because I think a lot of times, there's this underlying assumption amongst couples, like he should be able to read my thoughts, so like I'll look at the backyard and
but shouldn't they be able to?
Yeah, right. So I look at the backyard and I think my husband really needs to mow the backyard, and I think he should just know that, but he doesn't. Until I say that, like, hey, I think it's time. And so I think that piece is something that's really important. Don't assume that your significant other is reading your mind. Say it out loud.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It actually brings to mind to me something that Gottman recommends, which is having a weekly sort of like overview meeting, and like an hour a week, I think they recommend, where you kind of sit down and plan, okay, what is our week going to look like? Who's going to do what are the responsibilities? And now I think with the constantly changing situation at home that we're all at home together, that this might actually be something that we could do with our partner on a daily or every other day basis. So I think I recommend that as well.
Yeah.
Okay, we have a couple other questions. Any suggestions on what we can do to give our kids that feeling of control? That's a great question, because I think we all feel really out of control right now. I mean, the small things, I would say, any small thing, any small decision that you're not really invested in, that's an opportunity to give some control. What are you going to eat for lunch? What clothes do you want to wear? What activity do you want to do first? What show do you want to watch? Just any of those small things.
Yeah.
Kelly, do you have other ideas?
I like the one that you said where what activity do you want to do first? So when I'm doing schedules in the morning with my daughter about what do we want to accomplish for the day, there's certain things that always gets put on there, right? Like we're going to read, we're going to eat lunch, we're going to go for a walk. But I let her pick orders. And I let her know that if you decide when we get to number 4 that you want to skip to number 8, that's fine, just as long as we do them all. And so I think that being flexible in that can be really helpful and give them a sense of control. And she loves it. It's like, ooh, it says jump now, Mom. We need to go jump. And so, we'll go and do that. But it's kind of that scheduling the anchor thing on a more daily basis. But she looks forward to some of the stuff that we come up with together in the morning times to accomplish in the day.
Yeah. And I would say even maybe even allowing kids an opportunity to kind of pick the play activity if they're, especially with siblings. I know that's kind of an issue at my house, that they're often fighting over what activity to do or who's going to be in charge or who's going to have the rules for the game. And so I think, like, taking turns picking the rules or what activity is going to be next might be a way to help encourage that sense of control. Okay, we have a question here of, if my adolescent is constantly on FaceTime with friends, how much is too much? She needs social time, but I love this question. This is awesome. I actually have some things to say about this. So I would say in general, we know what we know about the research on screen time and its effect on the brain and mood is actually getting to be more and more clear all the time. So it's really important to break up periods of screen time with other activities. That's the biggest takeaway. And so if your child is doing 2 hours of screen time of any kind in a row, then it's probably time to switch and do something different, to give that brain a break and get involved in some other activity. So, whether that is, okay, you've been, doing FaceTime for 2 hours, now it's time to get off and do some chores or do some schoolwork, get outside and take a walk, come over and help mom with some activity. That's what I would say. Just kind of break it up, and even, talk to your teen, especially if you have a teen. They're obviously able to communicate about this and let them know why you are recommending that and how they see that happening. So getting that collaborative piece. What do you want to do next? Do you want to set a timer on your phone, or do you want me to let you know that your time is up? Giving them that sort of autonomy that teens are really desiring.
Yeah, and something I hear a lot, and this was, pre-pandemic. So I think that we got to remember that too. They're doing school online. Everything is in front of a screen. So they're getting way more screen time than typical. And this is just out of the norm. But one thing I hear often from my teens is, I know I need to be off of it. Like they kind of insightfully, they get it. But it's hard. They have that fear of missing out. I'm not going to have as many streaks on my Snapchat. I have to learn all the language because I don't do all that stuff. But through them, I learned some of that. And
right.
So they have a sense of that recognition that they don't need to be on it as much.
Something that could be helpful is maybe a household way to even schedule that everybody puts their screens down, so there's no screen time in our house between 6 and 8 in the evening time, and you kind of set that precedent, and so everybody is kind of pushed into doing stuff that it requires that physical interaction with the other members of the household.
Yeah, I love that. That's a really great option. Mm-hmm. And turning it in for the night so they can go to sleep.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. At least an hour or two before bedtime. So anybody else have any questions for us? Okay. Well, Kelly, did you have anything else you wanted to add? Anything other things that you felt like would be important for us to mention?
I don't think so. I'm excited that y'all attended, and I hope that it was helpful and useful. If we can be a resource in any way, we try to put out really good quality stuff on all of our social media to just try to help people. So if you have a suggestion or if you're in need of a resource, like, please let us know, and we'll try to make sure that we're putting stuff out that can benefit you as well. But we have lots of stuff out there in our blog and kind of everywhere to just try to be really supportive and helpful of our families. We want this to be a time that you can turn maybe your barriers into blessings. So
I love that. Yeah. So, yeah, please do follow us on Facebook and Instagram. Again, we're doing the Mindful Moments for Families series on Instagram right now, and we do different things like that periodically. So, if you'd like to see us there, we'd love to see you. And we'll be following up with an email about the offer that we have going, for those of you that might be interested. And we're just really grateful that you attended. I think if you take nothing else away from this, I want you to take away this idea that the biggest protective factor we have right now for ourselves and our families is our relationship. You have the most profound power as a parent to affect the feeling of safety and security in your child. And the best way to do that, if you hear nothing else, is to take care of yourself. Put on your oxygen mask first. Get that self-care time so that you can really be there for your kids and your family during this very challenging situation. And if you feel like you are struggling and you really are having a hard time, we are here for you. We have some great support groups for parents, for moms, and we'd love to have you join us. Thanks again.
thank you guys.